much for joining us today in this another exciting episode of the Leadership series of the Speak in Webinar. It is my pleasure to be present here. My name is Himanshu, and I welcome you all to this exciting session on the art of thinking big. Today, we have our very special guest. We are joined by one of the India's most powerful businesswomen, the founder and the chairperson at Havana Capital, Ms. Anjali Bansal, who is in conversation with Mr. Suresh Mahalingam. My role here is to just introduce Mr. Suresh Mahalingam, who will actually be leading the conversation with Ms. Bansal. So, without any further ado, let me jump right into introduction of Mr. Suresh Mahalingam. So Suresh has been a dynamic catalyst of change for over 30 years in corporate India. He has extensive experience at senior leadership roles in BFSI and FMCG sectors, where he has consistently demonstrated his ability to build and grow businesses. His exclusive work style and hands-on approach to leadership has led to his success in setting up and scaling organizations in highly competitive and dynamic environments. He was formerly engaged as member at Group Management Council (WGC), where he contributed to the formulation and execution plans for establishing WGC as a fully integrated financial services group with businesses in lending, insurance, asset management, and strategic investments. Suresh was also MD and CEO at Tata AIA Life Insurance Company, General Manager HDFC Life, and Business Head at ITC. Currently, Mr. Suresh Mahalingam is a strategic advisor to Speaking. He is also an independent director in Aviva and Principal Asset Management, and also he is a respected keynote speaker on multiple platforms. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Mahalingam. I would now like you to take the conversation forward and formally introduce Ms. Anjali Bansal for the session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Himanshu. Before I introduce our very special guest, Anjali Bansal, I need to give a little preamble on the context of the art of thinking big, and then how does Anjali Bansal fit in the scheme of the art of thinking big, and that's the way I'll take it. So, as you're all aware, a few years ago, relatively few executives considered competencies in crisis management, enterprise agility, cost management, workforce resiliency, innovation, or cash flow management as critically important to their business. Today, however, all the top managers and executives tell a different tale. I guess all of us are used to the COVID-19 issues. The COVID-19 crisis has brought new urgency to some of corporate India's long-standing challenges. The current COVID-19 pandemic has not only heightened uncertainty for the economy, employment, finances, etc., including the change in consumer behavior. For many, it has been a bitter reality, painful, costly, still unresolved. Either way, executives must accept that pandemic-induced changes in strategy, management, operations, and budgetary priorities are here to stay. You've seen lots of changes. Accelerated investment is coming in digital tech, transformation, and cloud adoption. We are on the leading edge of self-reinforcing process, promising even greater acceleration ahead. This presents an enticing opportunity for leadership who can manage complexity and drive competitiveness by tying digital transformation to business priorities, while others are still waiting for things, will it ever get back to normal? Today, we have with us Anjali Bansal, a dear friend who has been instrumental in my journey of thinking big beyond the insurance industry and created the opportunity for me in terms of looking forward to the broader BFSI space. So thank you, Anjali. So you've inculcated the art of thinking big already as far as I am concerned. A big thinker always visualizes what can be done in the future and isn't stuck with the present. Big thinkers are specialists in creating positive, forward-looking, optimistic pictures in their own minds and in the minds of others. To think big, we must use words and phrases that produce big, positive mental images. Surely, Anjali is one of them. Anjali is the founder of Havana Capital. She is also the former non-executive chairperson of Dena Bank and chaired Niti Aayog Investment Council for Women Entrepreneurship. She was privileged She was previously global partner and managing partner with TPG Growth PE and strategy consultant with McKinsey and Company. She started her career as an engineer. She's an active investor and mentor in companies like Nykaa, Urban Company, LoanTap, CoverFox, Darwin Box, and serves as an independent non-executive director on the boards of several leading companies, including Tata Power, Siemens, Bata, and Delivery. She previously was board chair of FWWB and continues to be an advisor to Seva Bank. She is president designate Bombay Chambers of Commerce and Industry, a charter member of TIE, served on the managing committee of the Indian Venture Capital Association, and mentor to Facebook's She Leads Tech. She has been listed as one of the most powerful women in Indian business by India's leading publication, Business Today, and by Fortune India. Welcome, Anjali. Today is going to be a very interesting conversation with you. The kind of topics that we will cover probably will require a couple of hours, but keeping the 1 hour in mind, 45 minutes of conversation and about 15 minutes of questions from all the people who have tuned in. The areas that we will broadly cover encompass about yourself, about leadership, about innovation, about board governance, about some trends on the economy, women empowerment, and diversity. So these are the broad areas that we'll try and cover. And the whole objective of interacting with you is that in each of these areas, are there something big that we can think of? Are there been good examples of things that have succeeded well? And even in this pandemic time, how do leaders react? What do they need to do? That is the basis of our conversation with you. So my first question, which is basically a kind of an icebreaker, just to set the momentum right. Engineering to consulting to private equity to boards to women empowerment to chairperson to policy-making bodies, and then having the tag, one of the most powerful women in Indian business. I'm sure you like it. Are there lessons here in the art of thinking big?
Suresh and Speak In team, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And I think Suresh gives me far more credit than I deserve. Suresh has had it's an old friend, has had a very, very illustrious career. I've learned a few things. I think the man behind Sarotake Geo, there's a lot to learn, and various other things as well. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you, Anjali.
So you asked me about the journey. I think it's been a journey and a continuing journey of discovery and learning. It's not necessarily one of sort of particularly premeditated design that, I will start career as an engineer, then I will do that, then I will do that. I think it's been a wonderful continuing journey. It's not over yet. There's lots ahead. I have a lot more learning and growing to do still.
Okay. So I'm just saying, but did you ever think from engineer you'll get into some other things? I mean, how did it happen? Was it accident?
Yeah, so it was, you see, growing up in India when we all grew up, and things are different now. I think there are a lot more career choices, career options that are feasible. At that time, if you were half decent at math and science, which I was, and I've always been sort of fascinated by space and science and technology. We were the Carl Sagan Star Wars generation. And so that fascination led to taking up engineering. I worked briefly in a lab at ISRO as part of my sort of training practicals in my final year and so on, and realized that while I greatly enjoy the technology and the science and what it can do, the application of it, but that's not what one wants to do for a career. And consequently, like many other people, it's a fairly beaten path in India, but I was fortunate. I got a scholarship to Columbia University. I went there, got a master's in focusing on international policy, finance, and ended up joining McKinsey in New York. And I think McKinsey was a wonderful, wonderful way to start one's business career. In some ways, continued learning post-university. I had also briefly worked with Women's World Banking in New York, which was the largest network of autonomous. In those days, 25, 30 years ago, microfinance was not quite a developed sector. Right. And so this was still in the early days of innovation and saying, what is the transformative power of microcredit in the lives of poor women at the grassroots level and livelihood? And Professor Yunus was doing the Grameen groups, and here in India, Elaben Bhatt they were looking at sort of the Self-Employed Women's Association model. So starting with Women's World Banking in New York, then moving on to McKinsey, and really the art of thinking, learning, thinking big, and seeing how you can actually have a transformative impact individually and collectively is something I think I learned there.
Okay. Okay. So while on the subject of career itself, and I know there are some young listeners also tuning in today, what would your recommendations or guidelines or considerations which should be duly thought through while choosing career options today? I mean, we had a different, I mean,
Right.
my generation was like.
I think the biggest change today is career paths are no longer linear and sequential. And it is not a one size fits all. So there are many, many more options. I don't know if I can be heard. The video has just frozen.
Try this one.
Can you hear me and see me?
Okay, now he's
Okay,
back.
we are all back. All right.
Yeah.
I think the big change, and this has happened, I would say, even over the last decade, is there are many, many more career choices. B, it is less about a job and more about a career. So it's not about getting a job, it's about what is the kind of work you want to do. And I'll come back to the kind of work for our younger listeners here. 3 is it is need not be sequential. So we are in the gig economy world, people do different things, they do multiple things in parallel, in fact. And most importantly, what you pick when you come out of college is not what you need to do for the rest of your life. So
True.
college really is a foundational learning ground. And ideally, school and college should equip people to become lifelong learners. And I strongly believe what you learn in college curriculum is obsolete the day you graduate. So your learning truly starts then in the workplace. What to pick should be a function of really follow your passion. What are you good at? What do you like doing? And then find opportunities around that. And eventually, but not too much later, find purpose. Beyond the paycheck, there should be some purpose to doing what you're doing.
Excellent. So while Suresh sir comes back, I would also want to understand, let me just pitch in with my question, Anjali ji, and just trying to understand in terms of, how has your journey been as a woman leader? Sorry, Suresh sir, I jumped in and
Sure.
a question which I was very, very passionate about. So, ma'am, how's your journey been as a woman leader? I know you've been asked this so many times, but really want to know how you have come to this level, beating so many odds which exist for all of us, both as a woman, as a man, I'm sure.
I think there are 2 parts to this question. What is the journey like as a woman versus what is the journey like as a leader? And I think as a leader, most people tend to have somewhat similar journeys, actually. The leadership journey is quite independent of your gender and requires, I would say, a fairly similar combination and recipe, as it were, of learning, developing traits, working with good people, surrounding yourself with a lot of positivity and can do. And most importantly, as a leader, you actually have to learn to serve. In today's environment, it's not the old model of the hierarchical leadership, the command and control. It's not that at all. It's actually very much the servant leader model. And and I learn more actually from my colleagues, frankly, today than they learn from me. And it has to be that way.
So jumping in again, sorry, I don't know whether it's my internet or Wi-Fi, but jumping in again, a lot has been spoken over the last 6 months on leadership. What leaders should do, what leaders should not do, how do we manage crisis management? A lot of gurus have come in. But at the end of the day, it is the guy who's at the helm of the affairs who has to manage, navigate, operationalize, and things taking forward. In this value of confusion, the pertinent question from a very, very objective, how should a leader lead today? I mean, what should a CEO do? I mean, I've been a CEO, I can understand. It's what should you do? And you're interacting with multiple company CEOs, you've been on board. I mean, is there a simple mantra? Because some people talk about believe in yourself, work on your experience, look at culture. What do you think is the right thing?
I can speak for myself and then I can speak from observation. As a leader, I feel one is only as good as one's team. We are only successful because of having effective and outstanding colleagues. So you cannot be a leader all by yourself. Right? To be a leader, you need to actually have a terrific team and colleagues who are working with you to achieve common goals and common outcomes. Those common goals and outcomes could be that of the company, could be that of an initiative, could be a not-for-profit. In any situation, you're only as good as your people. So it's very much, and I think crises like this underscore that we are only as good as our people. The ability to, in some ways, kind of deal with crisis very quickly, very decisively, put in place protocols, processes. I mean, think about what happened when the pandemic hit. We went from sort of 100 to 0 in 3 seconds when the lockdown happened. So dealing with that, thinking about survival of the enterprise, the work from home, creating remote protocols and so on, for a lot of companies that are in manufacturing, keeping supply chains running. So all of that required some exceptional leadership at all levels, not just the CEO. So one is have terrific people. 2 is invest in technology. So today when people say, is that a tech company or a non-tech company? I say, all companies actually have a tech core. And tech is no longer a vertical. Tech is actually a horizontal. It's what do you do with that technology, across functions, across processes, and capturing data and using data in a smart analytical way for business intelligence and making business decisions, I think is at the core. So people, technology, and culture. So the culture of a single person at the helm, Suresh, whether it is a guy or a gal who has great culture and great leadership can't do it on their own. Culture cannot be built overnight. So it is what you have invested in building culture that actually comes to the fore.
I'm going to stop you there because you're stealing my thunder. I've got questions on people. I've got questions on technology. I've got questions on culture for you. And hold your. Going back, you've been very passionate about the subject of innovation and coming back from a leadership perspective. Exceptional business growth and breakthrough innovation is about, in my mind, thinking big and a powerful vision for business leaders. Innovation, for leadership is a key attribute. Now, how do leaders imbibe this and practice the same? Do you see business models changing? I mean, you've got startups, you've got entrepreneurships, you've got legacy companies, you've got companies which are doing different kinds of things. Where is this where is the innovation dynamics coming into play? And you've been a great proponent of innovation. And I will combine later with your innovation, technology, and social impact data. But I'm just saying if you can dwell on innovation.
So I think innovation today is a given. We've been talking about the VUCA world for a long time. You can't be living in a VUCA world and not change. So innovation is just a positive term for change. In the startup world, they call it disruptive business models. That's fine. Disruption's fine. But the other side of that coin is innovation. You can disrupt, you can innovate. And there is nothing that prevents large companies, legacy companies with great histories. And then we have some terrific examples. Look at Unilever. Unilever has continued to innovate. They have continued to find and redefine their purpose and create that kind of culture. And I know we'll come back to culture. Innovation, one of the largest companies in India. I mean, think about going from a hydrocarbon-based business to now an absolutely data consumer-oriented business. And that is innovation at scale. I mean, there's nothing bigger than that in terms of thinking big. So I think innovation can happen at the startup level. It can definitely happen at the enterprise level. And in my mind, it is no longer a nice to have. It is a must have, must question everything, which doesn't mean you disrupt all your processes, but you must question, are we doing this the best way possible? So if you have traditionally been in manufacturing, is that the best way to run your manufacturing? Is that the best way to run your service architecture network, for example, service network architecture and so on? So everything can be questioned and said, how do we make this better? And that's innovation.
So extending the same points that you were dwelling on innovation. One way of looking at it is true innovation is seeing possibilities in what is plainly visible, but nobody else can see. You've been a proponent of technology with innovation having social impact. I mean, I see that as a statement which is pretty consistent with Anjali Bansal. You know, any meetings, any statements that I've seen these three words used effectively with. What are the changes you are seeing towards this, and are there any examples? Are there any white spaces?
There's I think there are white spaces all over the place, really.
Okay.
And it's let me take two examples and companies that I know very well and I admire greatly. There are startups in some ways, in the sense that they're less than 10 years old, and so they're very new overall. Urban Company, right? Urban Company's business is home repair, salon services, and so on. It's a very old business. There's nothing new in the business itself.
True.
The way they are doing it, however, is using technology to standardize it, create consistency, create a platform for ordering, backward integrating into saying we need to create scale. And at scale, how do you get consistency of qualities of service means you have to invest in skilling.
True.
And consequently taking technology, innovating the business model, right? Instead of us calling 5 different sort of carpenters, you know, you make on the app, you go and you ask for a painter, carpenter, whatever. And then taking that to large scale impact. So the formalization of that particular segment, the creation of sort of dignity of labor in a relatively unorganized, informal sector, digitizing that segment. That's also a low digital adoption segment.
True.
I think that is, so that is the entire journey from technology-led innovation to tremendous commercial success. Right? Tremendous commercial success, but also massive social impact.
Yeah.
And they are the largest skillers now in each of these segments.
And very successfully there.
Very successful. The other one is delivery.
Yeah, I was about to say the same. I quite think delivery is a great example.
Absolutely. So delivery, again, logistics, moving goods is a business as old as time, right? You've always had to move goods around. So it's not a new business, but the technology-led innovation of that and the recognition that your competitive advantage and efficiency lies in very smart, lean network management. Not necessarily first mile, last mile. And then the way they've done it. So they've actually organized it very well.
Absolutely. The way they made the entire business viable, feasible, and they covered all aspects, business, technology, human. And I think probably that's a great example of the three examples that we talked about: social impact, technology with innovation.
And again, formalizing and digitizing the long tail.
Okay.
Creating that dignity. So I think in places like India, and not just India, but many other parts of the world, our large problems of health, education, livelihood will require new innovative approaches to be solved. Yeah.
So that leads me to the next question. Again, a topic which you are very passionate, leading on from social impact, is Bharat. Leadership, scale, innovation, agility, being digital ready, compassion towards employees, you covered people, and business partners will be the key differentiators for business, both during the tough period as well as during recovery. Mm-hmm. One sees tremendous opportunity in Bharat. Where do you see the startups, industry, policymakers working towards driving digital to Bharat?
So it's actually quite energizing right now to see the investment being made in Bharat and the recognition that the low-hanging fruit of the quote-unquote people like us and so on, that is fairly done. If you want to do scale in India, it has to be with not necessarily the people like us category, but it has to be with non-English Indian languages. We call them vernacular, but they're really Indian languages outside of metros. And by the way, in metros, you can have a whole combination of metro, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 in the same. You take a place like Bombay, it has it all. So there is a very rich opportunity to innovate on business models that can, at scale, serve Bharat efficiently. And to serve Bharat, you need scale. You also need very efficient business models and cost and price points. So cost structures and price points that are relevant to Bharat. So you asked me about the policy front. I think so much has happened already and more is happening in terms of creating the digital infrastructure. So UPI, NPCI, UPI, the whole India stack story has made business models possible that 5 years ago we could never have thought of. So the interoperability of various payment systems, the efficiency of moving digital transactions. I think, and similarly, there are rails being built for livelihood. I know for education, for health, some of these, the education policy got announced. Regulatory reform has come in agriculture, for example. And again, if you think about segments of Bharat, you know, that the digital divide between India and Bharat. So what were the segments that were low on the digital adoption? The entire rural agri space, MSME, and casual work. So your sabji wala, bhaji wala, you know, your casual workers. I think COVID has really accelerated digitization of all of that.
So absolutely, I quite agree. No, that's a brilliant answer actually. And coming in from an ITC background, distribution background, understanding Bharat. You know,
and you've seen it so up close. I think ITC to
so,
me is a terrific example also of
so
being a very early innovator with eChaupal, and now I know eChaupal 4.0 and so on. Yeah,
absolutely. Now coming back, so slightly deviating from the leadership and coming back to an aspect which is again on people. And this is a question that I have specifically on the art of thinking big. I'm trying to keep it relevant to the bigness of things. Is also the ability to recognize people power in these challenging times. How do you drive purpose, which you spoke about, and culture? And to use some of your own words, how do you repurpose and reimagine? What do they mean to you? What is your style of bringing in purpose when you're working towards an important goal? Can you share your experience? Are there any mantras that organizations, and I'm coming from an experiential fact, but that pre-COVID, I mean, these are nice words, culture, purpose, but I didn't see any substantial meat into it. During COVID, I realized that if at all anything kept the organizations resilient, it was the power of the people, and they showed the capability. Is there need for us to look at repurposing or re-looking at what is it that we need to do?
What a wonderfully sort of deep question, and I will attempt to address it at two levels. One is repurposing business models. So there are business models that now need to get repurposed because of sort of virtual, contactless, etc. So how we work, the future of work is getting redefined. Business models are getting redefined. There is a much greater focus on direct to consumer, for example. And even companies that had not invested in sort of getting to know their consumer digitally are now finding quick sort of e-commerce type ways to access the consumer. The larger question is, you see, culture is hard enough to build in any case. But at least when people are together, physically together in locations and offices and factories and so on, you have that together time to create a fabric. In the absence of that together time, and when everyone's meeting like this on a screen, so much harder to do. So much harder. But I'll tell you, I have a personal example again, experience very recently. We made 3 very important young hires into our team during COVID, and they have been absolutely fantastic. We met for the first time in person last week.
Okay.
And we had this round of discussion with, so what has the experience been? And they said, it's been incredible. I don't feel distanced. I feel like I already know everyone. So I think it is incumbent as a leader then, and at all levels of leadership in the organization, not just as a CEO, to have much more frequent interactions, very open, very transparent, and also have fun together as a team, not just work.
But the related question on that is, are you seeing that change happening? Are there more organizations looking at, because there is a traditional style of working, now you got into a different style of working. And I sometimes feel there is overt management happening at the moment from a work from home environment. And consciously, the young generation is asking a lot of questions. And I can see it with my 2 daughters. One daughter is working, staying in the house. And I normally find that there is the purpose alignment not happening all the time, and which is the reason why there is some stress, some anxiety, and so on and so forth.
Right.
I think it's crucial for organizations to recognize, like you very rightly said, that people can transform organizations, and for that to happen, there must be an earnest effort towards defining purpose, defining culture, creating an enabling environment but more importantly, looking at feedback, receiving feedback from
Mhm.
employees, giving it back. I mean, those are things I don't know whether you see that happening.
So I think engagement is very difficult to achieve right now
Yeah.
with this mode of working, but engagement is even more critical hence. So I think that over investment of time in again, together time, even if it is virtual. And Suresh, you're spot on in the sense that there's been so much sort of stress and anxiety. People are worried about health, they're worried about their families, they're worried about their jobs. And I've heard from so many different people, and I quite understand this, given the way that the Indian cultural context of the workplace is, not everybody is comfortable working in a self-directed way.
True.
And managers find it very sort of stressful to have teams that are not sitting with them. So they have had to learn how to manage distributed virtual teams. And team members have had to learn how to work in a much more self-directed way. Plus, you don't have the advantage of popping over to the coffee machine or the water cooler and just blowing off some steam if you've had a bad interaction with your manager. Right? That's the reality. Here you have a bad interaction, meeting over, and you go back to your desk at home. And working from home, homes were not necessarily designed to have 3 or 4 people, including children studying from home. If it's both are working, sort of working couple, 2 parents working from home either.
Yeah. So now moving on from leadership related questions, Anjali, I'm going to another area where you've been doing a lot of, where you've been contributing a lot is on board governance and the role of boards. Now, again, one wouldn't be speaking if there was no pandemic, but nonetheless, I'm saying drafting a transformation mission backed by the pillars of transparency, ethics, sustainability, impact, purpose, which we talked about, and technology will actually build resilient organizations going to the future. It is not as it was not there before. It's just that I think the pandemic has just reinforced some of these things a little more seriously from a risk perspective. What are your views on the role of boards and what do they need to demonstrate or what capabilities they need to bring moving forward?
So more than ever before, I spoke about engagement. And when we talked about sort of executive engagement down with the teams, I think there's been a much greater frequency and intensity of engagement between boards and their companies as well through the pandemic. Initially around crisis management and just risk and compliance and so on and so forth. Also securing supply chains. In the early days, if you recall, in April and so on, April, May, just ensuring and securing your supply was important, keeping people safe. So you started with safety. First was employee health and safety, and not just your own employee health and safety, but that of your ecosystem, your vendors, your suppliers, your partners. Then going into enterprise security. So supply chain, cyber, and so on. And then it has been, okay, what does this mean? The best organizations and businesses and individuals are those that are not just resilient, but they're also very adaptive and agile. So when things changed, some things stopped being opportunities, but new opportunities come up. So spotting those opportunities and working with management to capture some of these new things, to pivot quickly if needed, to be agile. I think boards have engaged more frequently and with more intensity, as I mentioned.
And given all those things that are happening around ethics and so on and so forth, how do we strengthen the role of independent directors? And how do we? I mean, is there a new way of doing it? And I know it's a question.
So
I sit on two boards.
Governance, and independence. Is that of the mind.
Okay.
Governance is all about intentionality. We have the right codes. We've got plenty of codes in place now. And there are multiple gatekeepers of governance. So it's not just independent directors, right? It starts with your CEO and CFO, then with your auditors, internal auditors, external auditors, rating agencies, and boards. So when we see governance failures, there are governance failures at multiple levels, not just that of the board. I mean, in some ways, independent directors carry a very large burden, but have probably the least information.
True.
And so ultimately, governance is around intentionality. The independence is in the mind. I don't know how you can legislate independence. You can be on a board for 2 years and still not be quite independent in your thinking and thinking about stakeholders versus sort of promoter interest, if you will. You can be on a board for 10 years and still maintain tremendous sort of independence of thought.
I agree. Very, very well said. So, therefore, are you seeing a change? How are you seeing promoters, leaders, boards evolve in these changing times? You've talked about engagement, you talked about working with, and so on and so forth. Are you, because a lot of the Indian businesses are obviously run professionally, but they are obviously run through promoters and so on and so forth. Do you see any change in the way things are moving going forward?
I think there's an even greater recognition that board and management has to work like this together. An adversarial relationship is neither required nor desired. So they have to work together. But both of them have their roles. In a good functional board situation, see, if it's a dysfunctional board, then it's a different matter. But in a normal functional board, both have their roles, and both should work together. There is a mutual sort of challenge debate that should happen, which is good for the company. And at the same time, boards must support their management and not try and start to sort of run the company, if you will.
Anjali, I can go on and board. We are already
so can I.
Into the conversation. So I'm just saying, I'm trying to extract the best out of you on a whole variety of subjects. So I'm moving from board governance and board related issues now to women empowerment, and few questions around women empowerment. You've been speaking about women's empowerment. What needs to be done to improve women's participation in the workforce more so? And what more needs to be done in this area to further empower women? I think it's something that we must do. And what are your thoughts? I know your thoughts, but
so I would, if I may, if you allow me, I can put it a little differently.
Yeah, please.
Is how do we embrace diversity?
Yeah, that was my next question.
So diversity, the low-hanging fruit is gender. 50% of the world is female. Your customers, your employees should be 50% female, etc. So there is element of gender, but there's also an element of other ethnicities, religions, belief systems, sexual orientations. So I think it's a mindset, and it happens at multiple levels. There is the individual, there is the family and society she is in, there is the organization, and then there is the state. So all four actors have to play their role. I think for the most part, progressive states, and I mean nation states, so India, for example, they've done their job. We have enough legal framework for wage parity, for non-discrimination, for sexual harassment in the workplace, and so on, right? So I think the state has done its bit, for better or for worse. Good progressive organizations are also doing their bit to some extent. At least the hardware is getting put in place, so policies and frameworks and leave and so on. Software needs to be worked upon. And software goes back to culture. So I don't think we have to do anything more to educate the women. We actually have to work with the men now and make it truly inclusive and make it an inclusive dialogue. That the software goes to the society and familial contexts and constructs that the woman comes from. And here again, I'm going back to gender, but it could be any kind of diversity. And that is a longer process.
Yeah, that is what I was saying. Is the pace of diversity and inclusion, are they prioritized in organizations, in the manner it ought to be prioritized and actions taken accordingly?
So, Suresh, can more be done? Always.
Yeah.
Until you get to a 50-50 ratio, there is more to be done. True. We all know there is more to be done. But I'm also very optimistic. So I see this as a glass half full, where a lot is being done by good organizations. A lot more can be done, and a lot more can be done by more organizations. We still don't see a lot of sort of female participation. In fact, in India, female participation in the workforce has fallen in the last decade. So it does require us to kind of reflect on why that is the case. Is it just is it an outcome and a temporary outcome of rising prosperity that has happened in other societies? Or is there something else that we need to look at?
Sure. No. So let me move on to another related topic, which is entrepreneurship. And again, this is an area that you are probably nowadays dealing on a day-to-day basis, looking at opportunities, mentoring people, and so on and so forth. How are you seeing the landscape? It has always been good. How are you seeing the landscape of business entrepreneurship changing? Do you see an opportunity for them to think big and really become big? There are some great examples, but I'm just saying, how do you see the Indian landscape?
I think never been more exciting, to be honest.
Yeah, I quite agree.
Very, very exciting. All the spaces we spoke about, digitization and MSME and agri and education and health, all of that is being driven by the startup ecosystem with a lot of participation. And they are, they're thinking big. No one wants to create a small business anymore.
And what goes in their mind for thinking big? I mean, I think that's what one wants to understand. I mean,
yeah.
So I think ambitious. I mean, you've dealt with many of them, so
so that's what I do now on sort of my day job, right? Is we are talking to entrepreneurs all the time. We are evaluating startup investments all the time, also. And what drives them? I think there's so much passion and purpose around creating large-scale impact, and I don't mean just social impact. A lot of it is driven by, I want to be the next unicorn. No one talks about creating a small company, right? They're all talking about creating a massive company. So it's a good place to start. It then, of course, has to be backed up, not just by a big dream, but by a good, solid, robust business model. The ability to raise capital. Capital is a key ingredient in creating scale, accelerated scale. In the traditional way, you will grow incrementally, but if you want to grow exponentially, then you have to upfront the investment. And you are advising startups as well, so you kind of see that, I'm sure. So burn is nothing but a upfronted investment at its core. But a continuous burn means there is something that has to be looked at in the business model.
I agree. We can keep discussing this burn versus continuous investment for a very, very long time, because I think that's the balance that one needs to bring in terms of when does the burn stop and when does the actual meter start ticking. And for people, some of us, at least for me, I can say this from the old guard, obviously look at burn differently from the way youngsters look at burn. And so on.
No, but one of the positive outcomes of the pandemic, because some of the froth did sort of dissipate a bit, not entirely, but a bit, is a sort of renewed lens, at least, if not a focus, but at least a lens on how sustainable is the business model. How soon can you get to profitability?
So I'm saying nowadays it's all about ed tech, health tech, fintech. Where are all they headed? I know a lot of work is happening. I mean, I think the buzzword these days is ed tech and health tech. At least that's what I keep hearing quite a lot. Where do you see? I mean, where is I know there is opportunity, but where is it all going?
I think creation of new business models and ways to reach your ultimate your customer, whether it is an enterprise customer for a SaaS company, or it is a consumer for a it's healthcare, it's a patient or a doctor. In education, it's the child who's the learner and the parents. So I think finding digital channels to engage them and to deliver goods and services is very much the current mantra. I'm seeing so many first-time entrepreneurs. When we went through a brief lull in April, I think April, May, and then it came back with an absolute there's been a rebound in startup activity. So lots of first-time entrepreneurs, and interestingly, business models that are focused on tier 2, tier 3. Not necessarily impact, but just saying this is where the scale is. So going to tier 2, tier 3.
So just coming back to the same question, and you mentioned one quality as passion when you look for entrepreneurs before investing. Are there other things that you look for, other than the idea, the scale? I mean, are there any other attributes? Okay.
Much like we would in integrity is super important, and integrity is how do they deal with their employees, their co-founders, their shareholders? Is there tremendous sort of transparency and integrity in communication and information? Will they stay true to the cause and have? So I think integrity is beyond passion and good business model and so on, and also how good are they as learners? Startups will not have a static model. They'll continue to evolve and pivot and so on, and will hit bumps on the road. So some of those qualities we think about in good leaders, you also need to see in entrepreneurs. It's a big burden to carry actually for an entrepreneur. They also need to have lots of learning agility, confidence, but at the same time, humility to bring in team members who are complementary to them.
And where do you see the role of mentors? And I know you've been mentoring a lot of these companies. Not all startups have that, let's say, the availability of people coming and coaching them. Do you see a huge role there in terms of people coming in, helping these kids start up? And is there a process that can be done? Because
so first, I absolutely see a role. I'm not entirely sure if there is a standardized, consistent sort of process. It's actually more of a one size does not fit all.
Sure.
I think chemistry is critical.
Correct.
The chemistry between the mentor and the entrepreneur. Ultimately, it's not something that can be force fed. There has to be demand for it. They have to reach for it and want it.
Yeah.
So the heavy engagement, but light touch.
Okay. Anjali, I want you now to don the hat of an economist. And I'm just going to test you, not test you.
Completely unqualified. Completely unqualified.
No, the basic question is the economy as a whole, globally as well as India, is witnessing a decline in GDP. It's shrinking, and a lot of positive attributes have happened over the last 6 months in terms of government coming and supporting and so on and so forth. I'm not getting into numbers, what it was and what it will go. Being in multiple boards, different sectors and so on and so forth. Do you see business activities evolving from this phase? I mean, are you seeing any green shoots in the economy going forward? I know it's positive, everything's positive, but are you seeing some tangible signs, in terms of how you see the economy?
Oh yeah. So I think there are clusters of demand that you see picking up now. And so there are very tangible signs, even if you don't look at the stock market. So stock market obviously is showing lots of positive signs.
Yeah, too much.
But even underlying sort of fundamentals, there's a rebound, sort of a comeback and rebound in demand, which had slowed down during the early days of the pandemic. And in certain segments, in say consumer, in what's happening in agri and rural, in two-wheelers, for example, you are seeing sort of large clusters of demand. So there is activity, and activity is, in a different session the other day, somebody said, how do you kickstart the economy? I said, you don't need to kickstart the economy, it is running. We can certainly discuss and debate as to how do you accelerate, what is required, how do you get more capital in, and so on and so forth. But those are different points. I don't think we need to jumpstart the economy, it is running.
And the other sector that has been of tremendous focus has been the MSME. And a lot has been spoken, a lot has been offered to the MSME sector. Are you seeing resurgence? What role can industry, government agencies play to build trust and grow this sector?
So government, I think, is doing its bit. So even say GST, digital payments, KYC, setting up sort of credit mechanisms for MSME, I think a lot is happening. Some of it now has to be owned by MSMEs themselves and to formalize, which creates a cost burden, but that I think formalization now is inevitable and invariable. It has to be done. What can large companies do is help their supply chains up and down, upstream and downstream. So their suppliers as well as the distributors really embrace formalization. And then we are seeing this in multiple large companies where we are looking at consolidating our vendor base, doing more digital payments to distributors and so on and so forth, right? So I think we are starting to see some of that.
Okay, Anjali, I'll try and see if I can take some questions. We are 10 minutes before closing. So if participants, please post your questions in Q&A. I'll try and take the questions as it comes. Let me try and understand this. A question from Pradeep. Can art of thinking big be made into science so that more people learn and follow at different levels of organization?
I will recommend a book called The Theory of Abundance.
Okay.
This is from Singularity University founder Peter Diamandis. And it really kind of opens your mind and says, for a lot of us, we think in terms of constraints. What are my constraints? How do I optimize, the constraint variable optimization, etc. But if you remove all constraints, and not everyone can become Elon Musk and do SpaceX, but that's where their thinking kind of comes from.
Okay.
Theory of Abundance.
Okay. So please, can you repeat the name of the book again, Anjali?
It's called The Theory of Abundance.
The Theory of Abundance. Okay, perfect. There's another question which is, you mentioned a paradigm shift in today's leadership. Is something of sort of servant leadership which is seen developing? I didn't understand, but does it make any sense to you? Is something of sort of a servant leadership which is seen developing? I didn't understand.
I'm not sure if I'm seeing it develop. It's actually already there for the most part. I think most evolved leaders today know that you're not, you're certainly leading from the front, but there's no command and control.
Correct.
You're actually working with your teams.
So Anjali, again, how do you keep yourself motivated? Deepshika, why don't you ask the question directly?
Okay, thanks. So my question, Anjali, is that for every big thought that we have, in fact, when we were talking and we were thinking of what questions and what paradigm we would talk to you about, and the art of thinking big came very, very naturally to all that you've achieved throughout your journey. But for every single vision or unrealistic thought that you have that you want to build, there are a zillion trivial day-to-day chores that are pulling you back, right? Which are also required because they are hygiene or required for survival. How do you balance those? How do you kind of lift yourself up and
Right.
I don't know. I mean, you're getting what I'm saying, right? I mean, the realism
Okay,
versus
so again, the realism versus what can be done versus what you want to get done, right?
yes.
I think it starts, for me at least, it starts with the realization that I am but a very small part in a very large whole. So I'm a very small part of a large whole. All one can do is create the spark, do some ideation, build coalitions, get collaborative outcomes. So I'm a big, big believer in gearing. And so I'll refer back to gearing. As an engineer, you kind of think about, if I turn the wheel so much, how do I make the outcome 4 times that? And the gearing comes when you work with other people, with institutions, create coalitions around causes. And it's amazing how people will coalesce around and create a coalition around a cause, which is not a profit cause. So I keep myself motivated with, first of all, don't sweat the small stuff. Now, deciding and figuring out what is the small stuff and what is not the small stuff is something you kind of learn with trial and error. But yeah, working through people and thinking what will change the system versus what will just get things from here to there, and looking for outcomes other than for yourself. I mean, genuinely not solving only for your personal outcome.
One last point on that. One very last question. Sorry, I'm tempted.
Sorry, I said that in a negative way. So solving not for your personal outcome, but solving for a larger maximum. Yeah.
One last question. There's also, when you think big, because the journey is so unknown, you tend to feel like a lot of it is dragging. The time part, the time dimension of achieving something big, which is unknown, seems very, very long. How do you fight with that? How do you get over that? How do you be patient when you are going for something which is massive and completely unknown, and you don't know if you'll get there anyway?
Most entrepreneurs I know are not patient.
Yeah.
And most leaders are not patient. They put on a very good persona and facade of being patient, but they're in a hurry. They want to get things done.
Right.
And yet, knowing that it goes back to, we are a small speck in the universe. We are a small speck in the whole flow of time. So it'll take time, whatever time it will take. So you can't hurry up things. At the same time, you can't slow down yourself. So Anjali, I don't know if that addresses what you were saying. No easy answer, Deepshika.
I hear the dichotomy. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Anjali, before we close, a personal question. Mentally, physically, how do you keep yourself up to speed?
Mentally, I work a lot with young people. And I keep telling them that I do it because it keeps me agile and I learn a lot from them. I also work a lot I have great mentors and friends who are generous with their time. And so one of the things I do a lot of is actually pay it forward. So I will ask everybody who is seeking a mentor or seeking advice to also turn your finger back to yourself and say, who have I helped today?
Oh.
So help somebody in your own way, do something good for other people. And that gives a lot of energy. And and also gives a lot of learning. So that's how you keep learning and growing.
Anjali, it's been wonderful speaking to you. Before I let you go, your closing remarks and what you see of things going forward, if you were to condense all of the things that we discussed, and where do you see the opportunities? What is it that leaders need to do? If you can kind of just sum it up, it would be wonderful.
I think leaders more than anyone else, its leadership can get very lonely. And it feels like you're solo, you have to be never vulnerable, you always have to stay, show strength and so on. But I think you can actually be vulnerable, engage with your people, and truly think about you're serving your organization versus your organization is serving you. And what is the greater good? The greater good includes, of course, having a profitable quarter and good results and so on and so forth. But what is the greater good? So purpose-led leadership that engages people and drives to collective outcomes through collaborative efforts. So I think there is no, technology is a given, so I won't even mention that now, but very much around people and purpose.
Very nicely said, Anjali. And those are subjects which are also very dear to me: people, purpose, culture. And I think that's probably will change the dynamics of doing business as we go forward.
And Suresh, if you permit, I will just say that purpose is not separate from profit.
Correct.
It's profit with purpose. So, we believe in profit. Profit is good. You reinvest it, you create jobs, but with people and purpose.
Anjali, many thanks for coming by. You are definitely a special guest as far as speaking is concerned. And I promised Deepshika that I'll exactly stick to an hour. I will not take a minute more than an hour. And we just got 2 more minutes. But thank you so much, Anjali. And we really value your contribution. We really valued the input you gave us. And I'm sure there's a lot more for all of us to do. Thank you so much. Thank you, participants, for tuning in. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure.